Welcome to Thank You for Your Reply, where we dive deep into the strategies and insights of real estate's most innovative professionals. I'm your host, Rich Pedersen, founder of the Reply AI. Each episode, we explore the real practices driving success to today's market. No fluff, no pitches, just real conversation from real experts sharing real results. Today's episode is another PropTech Pioneers spin-off, a special segment of Thank You for Your Reply that brings you conversations with the minds behind real estate's technological transformation. While our main series explores the daily experiences of real estate professionals, these focused episodes introduce you to the founders and innovators who are creating practical solutions for the industry's biggest challenges. In this episode of the series, I have a super interesting conversation with Craig Bromberg, the founder and CEO of Homesy. This episode took an interesting turn from what I was expecting, and it became a deep conversation about the economics of the real estate industry from a humanistic perspective. Before we dive in, please make sure you subscribe. Your engagement helps to keep the show running. And without further ado, here we go. Hello, everybody. We're back with another episode of PropTech Pioneers, the offshoot of Thank You for Your Reply podcast. I think this is going to be an interesting session. This is we're here with Craig Bromberg, the founder and CEO of Homesy. He's going to talk to about how launching that platform and where he is now with it. Thanks for coming on, Craig.
Thank you, Rich. Good to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you start off by talking about what specific pain point in the real estate industry that sparked the idea for Homesy, and then how your personal experience influenced the development, and in so doing also kind of introduce the platform itself.
Sure. Homesy began for me when I was the editor-in-chief of AOL Real Estate in 2009 to 2011. I had actually come from Citibank's Mortgage.com, where I was editorial director, as we recently, as Citi had bought $7 billion of assets from ABN AMRO, the Dutch bank. And those assets were, as it turns out, the canary in the coal mine of the subprime revolution. And so when Citibank and Citi Mortgage, I don't know whether they were among the first banks to fail with subprimes or where they were in that journey. But when Citi began to lay off people, I got laid off as well. And I had 16 months because there was no time, no jobs, no houses, nobody wanted to buy or sell. The US was in free fall, as you might remember, and the Great Recession was taking place. And I was close to considering foreclosure with my family. I then had twin 1-year-olds, and it was scary. My marriage suffered. Everything was a mess. And so when I got to AOL, I really started thinking about, well, what really works to help the consumer with their choice about housing? Whereas my boss said, hey, we have listings that were rented more or less through Realtor, through the NAR and Move.com. And he said, your job is to push people to those listings. I was like, but nobody's buying and everybody's in pain. I just came from that. So I began thinking a lot about what would make my life as somebody who just went through that experience less painful. And I think part of it was recognizing that when you're a seller or a buyer, all the data that you provide and all the data that you see has been created by brokers, not by the people who live in those houses. Now you might say, well, the people who live in those houses, they are biased, but so are the brokers. But the broker's bias is to generally sell as many houses as they can, as quickly as they can, to make the most commission. And what they're doing is they're advertising their inventory. That is the nature of what the broker's job is. I have these homes. I can advertise my inventory, and they can hustle for more inventory, and they can find supply by co-brokerage. Although, as you probably know, the CCP, the Clear Cooperation Policy, has been under review, and the NAR has basically created a whole bunch of new rules just yesterday. I haven't even absorbed them yet about where CCP is going. But in 2009 and 2011, and even as recently as 2023, the idea that there should be an alternative route to how we think about the front end data that we see in a portal has been suspect. And the idea that the consumer might have a role in that data creation has been anathema to people in the industry, people in the PropTech business, investors, pretty much everybody I talk to who's in a position of financial capability or leadership in the real estate industry just hates this idea. But if I talk to millennials, they love it. Why? They have grown up with digital applications. They are comfortable creating user generated data, whether it's on LinkedIn or Tinder or public.com for stocks, Wikipedia for knowledge sharing. The idea of peer produced data, its validity, its legitimation, our ability to actually filter and understand what people are saying and to question it, comment upon it, vote it up or down, contact the individual who said it. All those things don't exist in real estate. None of that exists in any real estate application. And you have to ask why. And fundamentally, that comes down to the reality, the historical reality of real estate as a monopoly that has existed since the founding of the NAR. So that's what the background is to creating Homesy. And so it took me 10 years before I began to say, I think I understand what might be an approach to developing this kind of application. And during that time, I had marketing jobs and business development jobs. I came out of the editorial business, as I said. I was an editor-in-chief and writer for 20 years. I wrote The Wicked Ways of Malcolm McLaren about the manager of the Sex Pistols and his common-law wife, Vivian Westwood. I wrote for New York Magazine and the New York Times and about technology and popular culture, all kinds of stuff. And it was a circuitous route after having run Samsung's brand publishing for 7 years. It took me to Citi and then finally to AOL after that horrible hiatus. And so when I got to the place where I was starting to really think about this, for a long time, it was like a Rubik's Cube: buyers, sellers, brokers, data providers. Wow, very complex environment. But when in 2019, the first antitrust lawsuits were announced by the Department of Justice and the state attorney generals of Missouri and Massachusetts and Illinois and Texas started to announce that they were beginning to gather their wits and their teams to prosecute the National Association of Realtors and the MLSs, the affiliated MLSs, multiple listing services for those who aren't knowledgeable, I began to think differently about how to develop this because I recognized that the vulnerabilities that I saw were institutional and were very correlated to the reality that this was a monopoly that we were dealing with. What I didn't expect was that a monopoly would also stifle innovation as amazingly as it can. These are very good at tamping down threats from disruptors. And that's another thing. Homesy was born 4 years ago, and that led to my working with a dev shop to create an application. The app was completed, but one of the realities of being a startup founder, especially in a two-sided marketplace, is that it's very difficult to find traction and to find a simple route to traction. And the MVP that we built was unfortunately, I think, too robust and had too many features for people to actually feel comfortable with. It wasn't as simple as it could be. So homesy.us there's a web page out there, and the app actually still does exist. But within the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months, I began to recognize that it had become obsolete as a result of conversational AI and agentic AI. And so I've started to pick up the pieces of this concept and really rethink it as a new entity, which is called Keys. And if I ever decide and get the resources to develop it, it'll be at getkeys.ai. But for the
Okay.
meanwhile, I'm fundamentally looking for allies and people who really do want to see an application for consumers that is consumer focused without actually keeping out the brokers and other providers, professionals in the field, from the conversation about real estate.
Okay.
It's a
Interesting. Yeah.
lot to process. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. um, well, what do you envision being the main thing that people would do with it, with Homesy, or Keys, if it becomes that?
I think the reality is, first of all, that we have to acknowledge the paucity of data in real estate, right, from a consumer's perspective, and what the pain point is around that paucity of data. So right now, if I'm a buyer or a seller, or let's just stick with buyer or renter, the way it works is that the broker or agent will post something on the MLS, and that posting, and I'm going to put aside the private listing controversy that's been going on with Compass for the past few months. The reality is that when a broker posts something, they have 24 hours to move it from the MLS to Zillow, and suddenly there's this very fast evolution of I have a home for sale or a house to rent. And the rules on timing are different for rentals. So we'll just really push rentals to the side for a second. Let's just talk about homes for sale. And I will, as a broker, I want to get as many details as I can as quickly as I can onto that listing. My interest is in selling the home. That's my focal point. And as a seller, I want to do that as quickly as I can too. But as a buyer, the last thing I want is to have to train a human being to understand my likes, my wants, and my budget. Now,
Yeah.
brokers say, hey, we're professionals. That's what we do. We find the comps. We find as much data as we can about the house before you go see it. We only take you to the homes you want to see. We schedule the appointment. We take you to the place. We earn our money. This is our value. This is why you should pay us 3% or 2.5% or 2%, all negotiable, whatever it is. This is why you should sign a buyer's representation agreement before we even start looking at houses, although there's controversy. All these things are functionally make for a very stressful experience for the buyer because they're essentially being forced to educate somebody else to their taste, budget, way of thinking about the world, neighborhoods, you name it. It's a complex calculus. Now, people do that. Obviously, brokers have a business, and they're 92% of all homes are sold using a broker. It's an extraordinarily high percentage. The number of FSBO sellers is down to somewhere between 7 and 6%. But here's an interesting statistic. In 1985, 21% of the market changed hands without brokers. Unrepresented buyers and sellers were practically a quarter of the entire market back in the 80s. So
Interesting.
why has it changed? And obviously, one of the obvious components of why people buy and sell is because they feel like, and they've been told by brokers, that they're going to get a lot less money if they don't go with the broker. That the price that they want to get will be considerably lower. There's actually a lot of research that shows that that's not true. That actually the prices are practically the same. And sometimes the case for the FSBO buyer, they actually make more money because they're not paying brokers. But frequently it is true. And also, who are the people who want to buy and sell on their own? They tend to be people around the median, which is for brokers, it's not a terribly interesting place to focus because it's low money, low compensation. Volume is hard. It's tough. So the reality from the buyer's perspective is that it's a very stressful experience having the broker and their listing, which is really just a representation of the inventory that broker has. In no other field that we can think of, really, is that inventory-based selling the way we do things. Let's take used cars. The used car salesman, it's true, has a lot, a bunch of cars on it. People come. That's the inventory. If you don't like his cars, you can go someplace else.
Yeah.
But Carvana and CarMax said, no, actually, you don't buy a car based on the available inventory. Part of it, you buy a car based on your needs. And the more data we can tell you that you can be confident about, the better your chance of finding the right car for you at the right price. Well, homes should be more like that, but they're not. And the reason why is fundamentally because brokers have a monopoly, and they've had a monopoly that extends not just to the brokers, but they've also had a monopoly for the listings, the MLSs. And while there are off-market listings, off-MLS listings, pocket listings, so-called, and the Compass experiment with pre-marketing prior to the MLS is an example also of pocket listings.
I don't know. I don't know anything about that, and it might be something to jump into.
Sure.
But
Yeah. So Robert Refkin, the CEO of Compass, basically announced, I guess, within the last couple months, that Compass thinks of itself as a tech-enabled broker, would actually go and create pre-market listings that would not be available to the general public, but only on their website. And that they then would eliminate key features, for example, days on market, price cuts. And their objective is essentially to raise the status of that home in the pre-market listing before it goes to the MLS. And therefore, they hope to get you the most money. This is their claim.
it's like what is it when a stock is not public stock? It's like a
You mean
private
like
investor or
insider
whatever.
trading? It's not quite insider trading because it's published, but on their own website, right? And so, and then they go basically say, okay, then we publish it, but we do some. It's like, I think it's a three-stage phenomenon before they start posting it on the MLS. And so, obviously, they have some data that shows that with certain kinds of properties, they are capturing greater rewards or greater amount of money for that upfront purchase prior to the MLS. I think that makes sense, but it also, I think, is the opposite from where I think the historical trends of technology are taking us. And so with Homesy, what I did was I built an application that was fundamentally about this data creation capability, user generated data, and the other piece of the social component of people being able to comment, like, favorite, and comment, but also add additional data from the perspective of, hey, I saw that home and it wasn't as advertised, or hey, I saw that home and wow, I had no idea it looks in those photos that are provided, it looks different. And it wasn't to replace the broker, but rather to give the consumer opportunity to create more data about the home in a public environment. And the more you would post, the more your home would be seen. It's a branding exercise. So suddenly you have reach for your home because it's ad supported, not broker supported. And so now what's happening is the more you comment on your home, the more other people comment, the more your home is seen. It functions as a kind of advertising for your home, but their surrounding advertisement are not for homes. They're for kitchen sinks and faucets, pools, and lawyers and other professionals in the real estate world, lenders. And what this does, it resolves lots of the problems that people in the real estate business have, which is, for example, a broker can now have a voice about an opinion, just like anybody else, about a home. They can also use us to find leads. They can find people who are buying and selling and who want representation, not giving them the opportunity. The idea was to give the consumer the opportunity, give them optionality about this. But what I found was overwhelming sense of, from people in the business, was, why does anybody want that? Nobody wants that. And I have to say that I was unable on a bootstrap founder's budget after having built the app to find the traction that would give anybody the confidence that we were on the right track. Anecdotally, whenever I speak to somebody who's about half my age about what they think of this idea, they're like, that would be so cool. I would love that. That's for me, man. I see ads all the time and I'm like, that can't be right. That's got to be wrong. Or I don't want to go out with some broker showing me places that I can't find. Or why can't I find out more data about the comps? Like, how come the comps aren't assembled for me? And how come there's nobody pulling together like comps in the neighborhood or multi-location comps? Or why can't I compare this home's price to the price of a rental that would be similarly created, similar size, similar amenities? How come there's only four search fields when I look at Zillow? It's price, location, bedrooms, and bathrooms. What if I want to search by living room? What if I want to search by garage? What if I want to search by a house with two skylights and a garage overlooking a cul-de-sac in three different neighborhoods across the country? How do you do those searches on Zillow? Very, very time consuming. And a lot of these data questions are extremely time consuming. So then we get to the world of AI. And really, we see radical change because suddenly unstructured queries are capable of being resolved. We see opportunities for people to actually follow through those unstructured queries from the data about homes to the data around financing. It's also critical. Many of these kinds of things, AIs are capable of resolving the data query. But that doesn't satisfy what I think is the next piece of the puzzle, which is fundamentally to allow people to actually build on that data using their own understanding of their home and have the human essentially in the loop of the data, not just at the beginning or in a continual conversation with a robot, but actually with other humans who live in the neighborhood. Because the reality is there's a social life to the home data that we have. And I believe that consumers, especially younger consumers, like the social life of information.
Mhm.
That's what they grew up with. That's what they're
Yep.
comfortable with.
Crowdsourcing, gamification of everything. Yeah.
They like that. And what they feel uncomfortable with is a relationship where they're in somebody's pocket. They want their independence. They want strong self-efficacy.
Or at least the illusion of it.
Well, I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
When you're on Facebook, Instagram, all the meta, you're you're posting your life, but you're in Meta's pocket.
Well, that's true. It's famously been said, when the product is free, you're the product. And I think that is true. But we have to also consider what the consumer wants. And regardless of what the industry says the consumer wants. Yes, 92% of people buy homes, but it's also a monopoly. But it's also a monopoly. There's not a lot of optionality. If consumers could find a safe, secure platform where they were able to get any of their answers questioned 24/7 in real time, with data unlocked, as much data as they possibly could want, direct communication, buyer to seller, and broker if broker wants to be involved. That resembles LinkedIn. That resembles Airbnb. It resembles lots of different applications, but it's about the homes that we buy, sell, and rent as well. Because I think the reality is that the wall between buying and rental data has been also effectively created to convince people, or try to convince people, that they should buy instead of rent.
Mhm.
But we are in a rentier society. And it's part of the problems of our economics and the inequality that exists in society. And so, fundamentally, I think if we're going to try to help people create greater access to places to live, greater knowledge and access are tied together, greater opportunities to make decisions about housing, then we need some kind of platform like this. And that's what Keys, which is the successor to Homesy.
The the phoenix rising from the ashes. Yeah.
Rising, yeah. Maybe. I mean, somebody who spent, a lot of time being unsuccessful with Homesy. I have low expectations for being successful with a successor app that has some of the same characteristics of focusing on consumers. Because the truth is that I don't think the industry I know they don't think it's necessary. And they'll do everything possible to say, protect the livelihoods of the broker, and to protect, and that's what their job is. That's why people pay money to the National Association of Realtors to become a realtor. And they say that, well, yeah, there have been bad brokers, but there's going to be reduction in force because of the new regulations. But actually, recent statistics in the past week came out that show that the number of brokers is actually rising, not declining. So instead of a reduction in force, more people seem to want to be brokers, which is crazy. And I always come back to the famous statement that Mark Andreessen, founder well, the creator of one of the first browsers, and then now, of course, the founder and CEO of Andreessen Horowitz, the gigantic San Francisco-based VC firm. Software eats the world. And I think that that's true. Software does eat the world. And I don't think that a monopoly can ultimately beat the reality of
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. There's about a year ago, I was sort of on the, AI, played with it a little bit, and I was like, oh, it's cool, and oh, cool, I can make it write a whole novel, or or like, it comes up with these, put in some just prompt or whatever, and just playing with it, and but then by the end of the year, I had really kind of dived in and started learning more of the platforms and playing with it, and then I started my agency, the Reply AI, um, and which was based off of, started out on Go High Level as my platform, and their AI employee and all that. But I feel like coming around the corner in 2025, it's like the sensation of like we're grabbed onto the rail of a passing tram and got pulled onto it, and that's just like AI is just um, it's just growing and evolving at such a fast rate now that
yeah.
we can't it's just it's strap in or and be part of it, or be not be part of it. So
I think that's true. I think that's true. But I think that um, you know, there are behavioral economics behind our choice and decision-making characteristics, and how we come to make decisions, how we evaluate our opportunities for self-efficacy on a cost-benefit basis, how we think about, the agent principal costs, whether those costs are worth it. Complex economic and behavioral economic questions. And there are, substantial issues in dealing with a historical monopoly about how whether that monopoly actually does work for people. And I think that the argument can be enjoined. It may well be that that NAR is not the right vehicle for the current moment of technology. And there's lots of historical evidence to show that. The reality is that the notion of listings, is probably not even 100 years old, and they fundamentally are tied to the technology of newspapers, where they were classified ads, and they were bought by the agate, and those ads had to be short because they were expensive. Those search mechanisms came out of those ads eventually. And by the way, the ads were, I think it was Rupert Murdoch who once said, that the ads were the gold in the river of media. Classified ads, not display ads, but classified ads. And why were classified ads so enriching was because They were relatively inexpensive compared to like display ads, and pretty much anybody could list in that context. And brokers could list hundreds of homes, and that's what they did until the web came. And once the web came, that entire model was disrupted. The wedge was Craigslist, actually. And but now Craigslist today is if you try to find homes by owner on
Mhm.
Craigslist, it's terrible. I think the reality is once Zillow came into the market, which was 2006, aggregated listings from across the country. Not that you necessarily were going to do multi-location search, because in those days people didn't move around as much. There's really Stuck, and there's a great new book by a guy named Yona Applebaum. It's called Stuck. It's about this very kind of issue. But the reality is that people in that less mobile environment pre-COVID, Zillow satisfied the needs of people to get as much data as they could without having first to contact an agent. But as soon as they clicked on an agent's ad, essentially in Zillow, they were then in the grip of that relationship. And anybody in real estate will tell you that relationships are what the business is about. It's
Yeah,
a relationship business.
pretty much every single guest I've had on has talked about that.
But I would tell you something else. Real estate is a data business, and it does a shitty job of giving you the data. And what we really need to do is actually find a public consumption capability for building really complete data around a home. And now people will say to you, AI can do that too. You can estimate, you can take pictures, and the pictures will turn into numbers and SKUs, and you can do all kinds of stuff. Well, that might be true, but I don't think that the LiDAR capabilities of most phones have developed enough with enough simplicity yet to do that. That's first of all. I think LiDAR will come around eventually and be capable. And
What do
LiDAR is, I forget what the acronym is. It's like
so?
radar, but it's on your
Yeah,
phone. What it does is essentially you could just point your phone. There are a bunch of apps that are LiDAR apps. And you point your phone in a room and just go like this, and it records all the measurements, and it can
like
even
the what Matterport it does,
well, Matterport
kind of.
is a kind of based on both LiDAR and photography characteristics. I mean, there's a different bunch of technologies. But this is right on your phone today. It's right here. And, we can go and take our phone, but they're not simple to use yet. And there are other apps, like there's a great app called, I'm blanking on it, Casa something or other. That's a floor planning app and does floor plans on the com and just uses the LiDAR characteristics of your phone. So there are many apps, but they still lack the qualitative characteristics and the amenity-driven characteristics that our homes have. I'll give you an example. Because listings are focused on bedrooms and bathrooms,
Yeah.
right? They don't actually address any of the other rooms in your house. You can't search by living room or garage or
Hmm.
den or home
Good
theater.
point. Yeah.
It's just not capable. There's no platform that will allow you to do that. So what about like the size and shape of well, if the broker puts a picture of or a floor plan, then you can see it. How much can I see? If they don't even might show a photograph, but it's like fisheye lens, and
Yeah.
it's been staged and virtually staged, and who knows what. I have no concept of whether that's real or not. Well, what about all the other components of a home? Like what? Well, the basic amenities. What are basic amenities? Windows, closets, electrical, HVAC. Well, all that can be changed. When I buy a home, I buy it like that. Again, I come back to a younger millennial person who does not want to do all that work. And are what I call, at least this is my focal point, is the value driven buyer, not the people who are buying luxury homes on the coasts.
Hmm.
It's estimated by the Luxury Institute as something like $3.6 million per home. whereas in the middle of the country, it's like something like 1.7 for a luxury home. So I think between the median, which is about 415 today, and the 1.5, let's just call it 1.5, there's a lot of younger consumers who want those starter homes. They might be first time buyers, they might be second time buyers, it doesn't really matter to me. But that design perspective, that value driven perspective, those are the people I think that really want not relationships, not the limited inventory, but a wide inventory of everything available that meets their characteristics. And then they can do one of two things: contact the seller or contact a broker. And who's to say if the technology is safe and secure and there are other pieces, vigilant pieces? Uh, you could even hire essentially a security person to come as a seller and gang all your appointments in one. Do you have to pay a broker for that? No, it costs a couple $100 for, or whatever, however much you want to pay, $1,000 for a day to babysit your apartment while people come and troop through. It's a lot less money than 20, 30, 40,000, whatever 5% of the sales price is. And so, these are the questions. Is like, how do you reframe the activities that are involved at a price point that's realistic, as opposed to based on the percentage points? And by the way, I think anybody in the business will come on and rip me apart, on many pieces of this. And that's their prerogative and that's what they will do. But I think that the need for a voice where the consumer comes first, not the broker. What's best for the consumer? Not based on 100-year-old listings capability, co-brokerage as the fundamental marketing component, hidden data, although that's partially been resolved by the antitrust suits. This is where I think the future of real estate is going to be. I hope I'm alive before they get there.
Well, on that note, before we wrap up, um, what do you see in the next 2-3 years? What are the other technologies that you think might come out and
Agentic AI,
move real realistic tech forward and or backward or whatever? Do you have any predictions?
I think we are going to see, agentic AI continue to grow and become verticalized and more useful. I think, and more useful for, like, as I said, verticalized. So in every field of life, I think that we're going to see, if I need to have an operation, you're going to see verticalized AIs that will help you through the entire process of not just scheduling the operation, but understanding why and whether that's the right procedure for you to have. And it will do it based on a collaborative relationship between you and the doctor. I think that we'll start to see a lot more patient reported outcomes as part of this, that we'll see the human in the loop. In other words, the agent is not going to just function. Yes, they are out in the cloud doing what we need to do, but I think that they're going to be more conversationally focused. I think that the data and the lack of the hallucinations in the data will be decreased markedly. And I think people will understand how to create RAGs, retrieval augmentation generative characteristics, very small areas that create much greater precision in terms of the answers that the AI can give you. So I think AI is clearly, a big piece of this. I think the LiDAR characteristics on phones will become better as AI grows. And so that it will become much simpler to actually just point your phone at something, and then an AI can just simply immediately tell you about the layout, dimensions, what's in that room. That will help a lot. And certainly that is where a lot of the apps are focused now. Zillow is definitely moving in that direction as well. Whether that is an answer to the kinds of data questions that I'm trying to resolve is another story. Because as I said, I think the qualitative characteristics of a home that you might be buying are almost as important as the quantitative characteristics. In other words, it's not just the dimensions, it's the way the sun comes in the morning. It's how it's positioned on the street. It's how you feel about waking up in darkness if in a very dark, shady street.
What are the neighbors like?
What are the neighbors like? What's the noise like? How much do I hear the fire station down the street? What's the crime like on my block, in my building?
Is there an air traffic path over the house?
Whatever. All
Yeah.
these kinds of qualitative dimensions that people, they don't say them to you until oh, you could come stay in the house overnight before you buy it. I've heard that occasionally. Um, I moved from Park Slope in Brooklyn to Bedford Stuyvesant. And one of the qualitative dimensions that I think is most critical is because of the lack of mobility, because of the fundamental difficulty in buying homes with higher mortgages and higher prices, and people stay in their homes longer, is they get stuck in neighborhoods and then they deify and demonize different neighborhoods. And what happens is they don't see even a mile away from them that there are opportunities to go because that's a black neighborhood, because I don't know if I'll feel comfortable. There's lots of immigrants there, or I don't know if it's safe for me there. But I felt that same unconscious bias and racism in my own perspective about Bed-Stuy, which is across the park from Park Slope. And in July, after 10 years in Park Slope, I moved to Bed-Stuy, and I am the happiest person in the world because it's less expensive in some respects, but also because the neighborhood is truly safe and welcoming. And when I walk down the street and in a black majority neighborhood, and people are from the Caribbean, and they are so friendly and they talk to me, and it's a different environment. It's younger because it's less
There's
expensive. It's
probably
young.
good food there.
Restaurant food is different, everything. So I think, getting unstuck is part of the opportunity to create greater mobility that matches people's desires and where they want to live and how they want to live. And I think that is going to happen more as people get greater knowledge and data. All
Yeah,
has to do
perfect.
with qualitative components.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Craig. I think that's a perfect note to end on. The idea of getting unstuck. I think that can be applied to so many different
Oh God.
aspects of life. And it's never too late to like reinvent yourself. For example, it's never too late to start a different career or like do a different app instead of one you started out to making. And
I think, change is good. Radical change is not so good.
yeah,
And I think, disruptions are not about being disruptive for the sake of disruption. Disruptions are about actually recognizing that there's markets that incumbents won't recognize because they're not their customers. So they don't want to deal with those markets. And so the disruption, this is Clayton Christensen's innovators paradox, is that the incumbents not recognize what the disruptor is doing and call it a toy at first and say it's not necessary and all this other stuff. But the reality is those disruptions have changed the world. People said they didn't need cars, they had horses. People said they didn't need personal computers. They said they didn't need carbon steel. They said they didn't need, I mean, you can go read Clay Christensen and many, many different examples, people saying they didn't need it. And then it turned out that people did need it.
mm-hmm.
And, obviously personal computers, but if you talk to people who worked at DEC, they're like, that'll never take off.
Yep. Took took off is an understatement. And that's one of the things I think of just as a Gen X, where I was born in 1975. So like growing up without that kind of technology, growing until a certain point, until I think I didn't have. I mean, I wasn't really using the internet until after I graduated from college, so like 1998. Was like emailing, and the the World Wide Web was becoming a little bit more useful at that time. But just as in my adulthood and growing up till now, like kept up with things pretty well. And so it's been really nice to have had the perspective of not having this technology.
Well, I do think that there's a elegiacal, the reality is we're losing a lot as a result of technology. And that's one of the reasons why I come back to humans in the loop, because we need to somehow recognize that both technology is important and useful. But we also have to recognize the value that humans bring to the table and how not to be overwhelmed by the technology, to get back to some of the characteristics of knowledge between people. Again, the social life of information, as opposed to just simply TikToking our way through the world. That's not what I'm talking about. There is some of that in you know in apps, but the reality is also that there's a lot we can do to help people in their day-to-day quotidian life that allows them to make better choices for themselves based upon the knowledge they get from other human beings. And we see that time and time and time again. And I think it can't be resisted. Can't hold back.
Nope. Well, thank you so much, Craig. Here's to being unstuck, getting unstuck. Really enjoyed our conversation, and let's do it again sometime.
Let's do it.
Monthly talks with Craig. That wraps up another episode of PropTech Pioneers. A big thanks to Craig Bromberg for sharing his unique perspective and giving us a warts and all view of developing a real estate app. To our listeners, you can find show notes and links below this video, or if you're on audio, in the show description. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe so you'll be able to catch the new episodes when they drop. Until next time, keep innovating, keep growing, and remember, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems.